Welcome, friends, to this channel where family stories are told the way they deserve to be told, with honesty, with heart, and with the lessons tucked between each line. If this story moves you, remember to stay with us. Subscribe if you wish, because here we gather each week to share not just tales, but mirrors of our own lives. Today, I bring you a story titled, I Was Called a Parasite at a Family Party. 30 minutes later, the whole town learned I owned their house. My name is Clara Monroe. I am 34 years old, and I live in Charleston, South Carolina, a town where the air smells like salt water and magnolia blossoms, and where families cling to reputation the way a sailor clings to the mast during a storm. Charleston is beautiful, yes, but beauty does not soften cruelty. That evening, the house glowed with golden string lights. The yard was filled with the chatter of relatives and the clinking of ice in glasses. A roast pig sat at the center of a long buffet. Laughter rippled over the lawn, and to anyone walking by, it looked like a perfect Southern family gathering. But to me, it felt like a stage, and I was cast as the fool. I sat near the end of the table, close to the shadows of the porch, listening more than speaking. I had always been the quiet one, the girl who worked jobs too small to be admired, who came and went without demanding space. I was used to being overlooked, but that night, overlooking wasn't enough for them. That night, they needed someone to bleed in front of the crowd. My stepmother, her name is Evelyn, though most people call her Miss Monroe, with a kind of reverence she doesn't deserve, stood with a glass of Merlot in her hand. Her bracelets shimmered, her lipstick was perfect, her smile was sharp as glass. She lifted her glass high, waiting until the yard fell into hush, and said in a voice coated with honey but edged with steel, "Sweetheart, you can't even pay for your own wine. What are you if not a parasite?" The word slammed into me harder than the summer heat. Parasite. The cousins tittered nervously. An uncle coughed into his drink to hide a laugh. Even the children stopped their game of tag to look my way, eyes wide. And I sat frozen, my hand tightening around the stem of my glass. I wanted to say something. God knows I wanted to remind them of the nights. I worked double shifts in diners while they slept under safe roofs, to remind them of the years I had sacrificed quietly, sending small checks to help with bills, fixing things no one else bothered with. But when shame swells in your throat, words drown. So I did not speak. Instead, I reached into my bag and wrapped my fingers around the familiar weight of my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen as the laughter and whispers pressed down on me like a storm cloud. And then, with a calmness that surprised even me, I typed 3 words. Cancel everything now. No one noticed. They were too busy enjoying the spectacle, the drama of Evelyn's performance. They didn't know that behind my silence lay a truth none of them could imagine. Just a week earlier, I had signed a contract. The ink was still fresh. That sprawling colonial house with its white columns and creaking porches, the very house we stood in, no longer belonged to them. It belonged to me. The deed carried my name. The keys sat heavy in my pocket, but Evelyn didn't know. None of them knew, and so they mocked me freely, believing I was still dependent, still beneath them, still the leftover child clinging to scraps. A cousin leaned over to whisper, not quite softly enough, "She's always around when it's free food." Another added, "She never brings anything of her own." Their words cut, but underneath the sting was a strange sort of peace, because I knew what was coming. When you hold the truth, you can let the lies pile up. You can sit still while others build their tower of insults, knowing you have the match that will burn it down. The night air thickened with the smell of barbecue, with Evelyn's perfume drifting sharp as lilies. She leaned closer, her voice dropping, intimate and cruel. "Look at you, Clara, 34, still figuring it out, still drifting." I felt the eyes on me, dozens of them, hungry for my reaction, and still I said nothing, because 30 minutes later, when the caterers failed to deliver the next round of food, when the lights flickered and dimmed, when the bar staff quietly began packing their things, that was when the truth would step into the open. They thought they had stripped me down to nothing. They thought I was weak, powerless, a parasite. But parasites don't own houses. And I was about to remind them in the most unforgettable way that this entire party sat under my roof. So I sipped my water, let Evelyn smile in triumph, and whispered to myself the same line I had typed into my phone. Cancel everything now. And in that silence, as the cicadas buzzed and the laughter carried on, I felt the storm turn in my favor. The insult lingered in the air long after Evelyn's words had fallen silent. Parasite. My stepmother had always known how to choose the sharpest knife from the drawer. She wielded it that night without hesitation, and every smile around the table became another blade turned in my direction. I pressed the cool glass of water to my lips, steadying my breath, pretending to sip as my phone buzzed faintly against my thigh. The message had been delivered. The wheels were already turning, but for the moment no one else knew. The evening pressed on with its false cheer. Uncles told jokes too loud, cousins shrieked with laughter at stories about long-ago schoolyard victories, and children wove between the chairs chasing fireflies in mason jars. To them, I was invisible, except when Evelyn made sure I wasn't. She leaned across the table again, her voice pitched just high enough for nearby ears. You don't even contribute to this family, Clara. Not a cent. Always taking, never giving. Isn't that right? Her words carried like smoke, curling into every ear, seeping into every corner of the yard. Nobody corrected her. Nobody defended me. They never did. I smiled faintly because I could afford to. The truth was on its way. At first, it was small things. The servers, who had been gliding in and out of the kitchen with trays of hors d'oeuvres, suddenly stopped. The silver trays went empty. The scent of sizzling appetizers disappeared, leaving only the stale smoke of the grill outside. A cousin raised his hand for another glass of Chardonnay and was met with a blank stare from the bartender, who was quietly collecting his tips and folding the cloth over the counter. People began to murmur. What's going on? Someone asked. I thought we had more food coming, another whispered. Evelyn didn't notice. She was too busy with her own performance, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin, wearing that queen's smile she loved so much. The kind that said she owned this table, this house, this family. But I noticed, and my chest warmed with something between relief and anticipation. Then the lights. They flickered once, a brief shiver of electricity that made the string lights overhead blink like startled eyes. A few guests gasped, then laughed it off, but when the second flicker came, longer, deeper shadows trembling across the walls, the laughter died. The house exhaled like it was tired of keeping secrets. Evelyn's smile faltered. Someone check the fuse box. She ordered sharply, as if even the electricity was beneath her command. But no one moved. The whispers grew louder now. My uncle, red-faced from beer, squinted at the bartender hauling boxes through the kitchen door. Why are they packing up? We paid for the night. No, I thought, watching him, you didn't. The caterer's van rumbled to life outside, headlights sweeping across the lawn as trays of untouched food clattered into the back. The music stuttered to a stop. The hired DJ was already winding cables, muttering apologies as he wheeled his equipment out the door. I sat very still, letting the scene unfold, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Around me, panic bloomed like wildfire. What is happening? Where's the rest of the dinner? Why are they leaving? Even Evelyn rose from her seat now, her chair scraping harshly against the wood. She stormed toward the bar, demanding answers, but the staff ignored her. Contracts don't bend for raised voices. Orders cancel clean. Money talks louder than entitlement. I could feel the eyes turning toward me, though no one dared speak the thought yet. I, the so-called parasite, was the only one untouched by confusion. When Evelyn returned, her cheeks blotched crimson, she slammed her glass onto the table hard enough to crack the stem. They say the booking was revoked, she hissed, glaring at the crowd as though someone else had betrayed her. Revoked, can you imagine, on my night? It was almost too much. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. The yard was unraveling now. Children cried, uncles cursed, cousins scrolled frantically on their phones trying to find explanations online, as though Yelp would save them. The golden strings of lights above blinked once more, then went dark altogether, leaving us in the dim glow of porch lanterns and the indifferent moon. Silence fell. Heavy, awkward, undeniable. That was the moment I rose. Slowly, deliberately, every head turning as my chair slid back. I wasn't dressed like a queen, just a simple black dress I'd bought years ago from a discount rack. But in that moment, the fabric felt like armor. I walked to the center of the yard, where the laughter had been loudest earlier, and I let the silence stretch until even Evelyn could not fill it. Then, quietly, I said, "Do you want to know who revoked the booking?" No one answered. The only sound was the soft chirp of cicadas, steady and ancient. I reached into my bag, pulled out a folded envelope, and held it up. The porch light caught the edge of the paper, gleaming faintly like a sword unsheathed. "This house," I said, letting the words fall slow, "doesn't belong to you anymore." Gasps. Someone muttered a confused, "What?" Evelyn froze, her mouth half open, her glass trembling in her hand. I opened the envelope, sliding out the crisp contract, the deed with my name written clear across it. I laid it flat on the table in front of her, the ink dark and undeniable. "You called me a parasite," I continued, my voice calm now, steadier than I had ever heard it. "But parasites don't buy houses. Parasites don't hold deeds. Parasites don't pay for the roof you're standing under." For the first time in years, Evelyn had no words. Around us, the family shifted uncomfortably, the weight of truth pressing heavier than the humid summer air. No one laughed now. No one whispered. They only stared at the paper, at my name written there, at me. And I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood, breathing in the silence, knowing the shift had come. The house was mine. The night was mine. The power was mine. And for the first time, they saw me not as the parasite, but as the owner. The night ended not with applause or shouting, but with silence so thick it pressed against the walls of the old house. One by one, the guests gathered their coats, their purses, their excuses, and slipped away into the night. No hugs, no farewells, just the shuffle of feet on gravel and the slam of car doors. I stayed on the porch long after they left, the deed still lying on the table inside like a verdict no one dared contest. The cicadas sang. The air smelled of spilled wine and extinguished candles. And Evelyn, my stepmother, had locked herself in the upstairs bedroom, refusing to come down, her reign broken by paper and ink. By midnight, the house was mine not just on paper but in presence. I walked its halls alone, touching the frames on the walls, the banister worn smooth by decades of family hands. Every corner carried memory, birthdays, arguments, the laughter of cousins in summer. And yet, for the first time, those memories didn't choke me. They belonged to me now as much as the deed in my bag. When I finally slept, it was on the couch in the living room, the hum of silence filling the space where music had been. Morning light spilled through the windows, sharp and unyielding. I woke to the sound of voices outside. The neighborhood in Charleston was small, close-knit in a way that meant privacy was always borrowed time. By sunrise, the story had spread like wildfire. They say Clara owns the house now. Impossible. Evelyn's name has been on it for years. I heard she bought it outright, cash. Cash from where? Don't know, but she showed the papers last night in front of everyone. I stood at the window, watching Mrs. Langley from next door whisper fiercely to her husband over the hedges. Two teenagers on bicycles stopped at the end of the driveway, pointing, shaking their heads. And when I opened the front door to pick up the morning paper, A neighbor I barely knew slowed his jog just enough to glance at me, curiosity plain in his eyes. The whole town would know before noon. Inside, the house smelled of stale smoke and spilled liquor. The remnants of the party, half-empty glasses, crumpled napkins, plates of cold meat, were scattered across the counters. I rolled up my sleeves, filled a basin with hot water, and began cleaning. It wasn't pride that drove me. It was clarity. For years, I had been painted as the one who never gave back, who lived off scraps, who drained the family without offering anything in return. But now, as I scrubbed lipstick stains from the wine glasses and carried out bags of trash, I realized I had always been the one doing this work, quietly, unnoticed, and still they had called me a parasite. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. When I opened it, Evelyn stood there, not the glamorous queen of last night, but a disheveled woman in a silk robe, her makeup smudged, her eyes red from a night without sleep. "You humiliated me," she hissed before I could speak. "In front of everyone." "No," I said softly, "you did that yourself." She glared, but I didn't flinch. For once, the balance between us was clear. She was scrambling, I was steady. "You think owning this house makes you powerful?" she demanded. "It makes you a fool. Do you know how expensive it is to maintain? The taxes, the repairs." "I know," I replied, "and I've planned for it." Her mouth opened, closed. She wasn't expecting that answer. For years, she'd believed me incapable of foresight, of responsibility, of strength. The silence between us grew until she finally turned and walked away, her slippers shuffling against the floor. By noon, the phone calls began. Cousins who hadn't spoken to me in months suddenly remembered my number. They called with false cheer in their voices. "Clara, hey, I just wanted to say last night was crazy, huh? But listen, if you ever need help fixing up the place, I'm your guy." An aunt texted, "So proud of you. We always knew you had potential. Family sticks together, right?" And then there were the reporters, small local outlets curious to write about the woman who had turned a family party into a spectacle. They wanted quotes, photos, details of how I'd done it. I ignored them all. Because the truth was, the house wasn't the story. The house was just a symbol. The real story was respect, or the lack of it. That evening, I walked into town. The cobblestone streets of Charleston gleamed with the glow of street lamps, and shopkeepers leaned against their doors, trading gossip. I felt the eyes follow me as I passed, the same eyes that once slid past me as though I were invisible. At the small cafe on King Street, I sat with a cup of black coffee, the bitter warmth steadying me. Two women at the next table whispered my name. A man behind the counter gave me my drink on the house. And when I caught my reflection in the cafe's window, I saw something I hadn't in years. Dignity, plain and unshakable. That night when I returned to the house, Evelyn was gone. Her belongings were packed, the upstairs room stripped bare. On the kitchen counter, she left a single note, written in her elegant cursive. "Enjoy your kingdom, but remember crowns are heavy." I folded the note and slid it into the drawer. Yes, crowns are heavy, but I had carried heavier burdens before. I walked through the house, turning off lights, touching the walls that once seemed to close in on me. Now they opened outward as if waiting to see what I would do. And in the quiet of that evening, I promised myself the house would not become a fortress. It would not be another cage. It would be a place of rebuilding, of proving that ownership is not about possession, but about purpose. For the first time in years, I felt the future shifting in my hands, and somewhere outside, beyond the hedges and porches and cobblestone streets, the town was still buzzing with my name. But inside, I finally heard my own voice again. The first night alone in the house was not peaceful. The silence was thick, not the gentle quiet of safety, but the kind that pressed on the chest like a heavy stone. I lay awake, listening to the creaks of the old wood, the groan of pipes, the far-off crash of waves on the Charleston shore. Every sound carried memory. Every corner whispered of a time I wished to forget. Owning the house was victory, yes, but victory can be hollow when the battleground is littered with ghosts. I closed my eyes and the ghosts came rushing back. When I was 9, the roof leaked in 3 places. Rainwater pooled in bowls across the kitchen floor, and my mother scrambled with towels while Evelyn, not yet my stepmother but already a presence, laughed at the mess. "This place is falling apart," she'd said, smirking as though the house itself were a joke. But my mother didn't laugh. She worked double shifts at the diner, her hands chapped from scrubbing plates, her back bent from long hours. She patched the roof herself with tar and nails, climbing ladders barefoot because there wasn't money for repairmen. I watched her from the ground, clutching the hem of her apron, thinking she was invincible. But even invincible women can fall. She died when I was 16, and Evelyn married my father within a year. Suddenly, the house I grew up in was no longer mine. It became Evelyn's stage. She replaced the curtains with silk, threw out the chipped dishes my mother had loved, and hung photos of her own family on the walls. My mother's picture ended up in the attic, face down in a dusty box. I never forgave her for that. There were other memories, sharp as glass. Christmas mornings where Evelyn handed out gifts with theatrical flair, saving the smallest, cheapest box for me. Birthdays where I blew out candles alone while she toasted my stepsisters with champagne. Nights when she would lean close, her perfume overwhelming, and whisper, "You should be grateful we even keep you here." Grateful, as though survival was a gift, and I owed them thanks for not discarding me altogether. I carried those words into adulthood. They carved themselves into my skin, invisible scars that burned whenever someone looked at me as less than whole. After my father died, the house should have come to me. At least that's what I believed, foolishly clinging to the hope that he'd remembered I was his daughter too. But the will said otherwise. Everything, the house, the land, the furniture, went to Evelyn. She didn't even pretend to be gracious about it. "Your father knew who deserved it," she told me, her eyes gleaming with triumph. That was the day I walked away. I rented tiny apartments, slept on couches, worked jobs that barely paid rent. I lived without roots, drifting from place to place, carrying only the memory of what was stolen. But roots have a way of pulling you back. Years later, after long nights of saving, of hustling through freelance projects and patchwork jobs, I saw the house listed quietly, almost in secret. Evelyn had fallen behind on payments, her glamorous life cracking beneath debt. The house that once seemed untouchable was slipping from her grip. And I, child of the attic, girl with no chair at the table, I had just enough saved and more than enough determination. Signing that contract was like breathing again after years underwater. Now, lying awake in the same house that had once been my prison, I finally understood why I had done it. It wasn't just about proving Evelyn wrong. It wasn't just about revenge, though I would be lying if I said revenge didn't taste sweet. It was about reclaiming the piece of myself that had been buried under years of ridicule. It was about walking through halls where my mother once hummed while she cooked and saying, "This is ours again." I rose from the couch, padding barefoot through the dark. In the kitchen, I opened the small attic door and climbed the narrow stairs, each step groaning with memory. The attic smelled of dust and cedar. Boxes were stacked in uneven towers, forgotten treasures and abandoned junk. I sifted through them until I found what I was looking for, an old photograph. It was my mother, standing in the very kitchen below, her hair pulled back, her smile weary but real. She wore the apron she'd patched 3 times, her hands flour-dusted from baking biscuits we couldn't afford. I sat on the attic floor, cradling the photo, tears hot in my eyes. "This is why," I whispered into the dust. "Not for them, for you, for me." The next morning, the town's gossip had sharpened into questions. At the grocery store, whispers followed me down the aisles. At the post office, people stared openly. Some looked at me with admiration, others with suspicion, as though waiting for the truth to crack. A neighbor stopped me outside the house. "You really bought it?" she asked, her tone half disbelief, half awe. "Yes," I said simply. Her eyes softened. "Good for you. About time someone stood up to her." That was the first time I realized my story wasn't just my own anymore. It had become something bigger, a mirror for everyone who had ever been underestimated, laughed at, dismissed. And though I didn't ask for it, I carried it with me, the way my mother had carried that house even when it leaked and crumbled. That night, I placed my mother's photograph on the mantel above the fireplace, where Evelyn's gaudy mirror used to hang. I lit a candle beside it. The flame flickered against the glass, illuminating her smile, and for the first time since I moved back, the house felt less like a battlefield and more like a home. Yes, Evelyn's words still echoed, parasite, fool, unworthy. But louder than those were the memories of my mother's strength, her laughter, her refusal to give in. The roots of this house were not Evelyn's. They were mine. And now, finally, I was ready to grow from them. It happened on a Sunday, in the same house whose walls were still heavy with the memory of Evelyn's defeat. I hadn't planned to host anyone. The last thing I wanted was more laughter that wasn't meant for me, more voices raised not in love but in accusation. Yet, family has a way of summoning itself when there is blood in the water. By mid-afternoon, they arrived, cousins, uncles, aunts, all with their polite smiles and hard eyes. They carried casserole dishes and excuses, setting them on the counter as though food could soften their intentions. The dining room filled again, not with celebration this time, but with the tense quiet of a courtroom before the judge enters. I stood at the head of the table, my arms crossed, watching them settle into chairs that now belonged to me. No Evelyn this time. She had vanished days ago, her absence both a relief and a shadow, but her spirit lived in the voices of those who had chosen her side for years. It was my cousin Mark who spoke first, his tone sharp enough to slice bread. "Clara, we need to talk about what happened, about what you did." "What I did?" I asked evenly. "You humiliated this family," he said, leaning forward. "In front of neighbors, in front of the town, showing off that deed like some kind of trophy." Aunt Ruth chimed in, her pearls glinting against her throat. "We all know you bought the house. Fine, but let's be honest, Clara, you didn't do it alone, you had help. And if you had help, then it belongs to all of us too." Murmurs of agreement rippled down the table. Faces I had grown up with nodded solemnly as though they were delivering wisdom, not theft. I gripped the edge of the table, feeling the wood dig into my palms. "The deed has one name. Mine. I signed it alone. I paid for it alone. I fought for it alone." Uncle Gerald snorted, his belly jiggling with the effort. "Don't get self-righteous. You were always the stray, the one we had to carry. Now you finally come into some money and suddenly you think you're better than us." Better, that word, it always came like a curse. My voice stayed calm, but inside I felt the familiar burn of shame trying to rise. I wouldn't let it, not anymore. "I don't think I'm better," I said. "I think I'm equal, and that's what you can't stand." The room bristled. Someone muttered, "Ungrateful." Another hissed, "She's selfish." Then came the blow that sucked the air from the room. My stepbrother, Daniel, who had been silent until then, leaned forward, his eyes cold. "You owe us, Clara. You owe this family. You wouldn't even be here if we hadn't fed you, kept you under this roof after your mother died. That money, that house, it should be shared. That's what family means." My chair creaked as I sat back, letting his words hang. Parasite, grateful, owe us. The same script, rehearsed over decades, now performed one more time. But this time I had a different ending. I reached slowly into my bag. Their eyes followed the movement, suspicion flickering. I pulled out my phone, the same phone I had used weeks earlier to send the message that ended Evelyn's party. And without a word, I placed it on the table, screen glowing. "What are you doing?" Aunt Ruth demanded. I met her gaze steadily. "You want to know where the money went. You want to know what I've done with it. Fine, let me show you." My thumb tapped the screen. A video filled the silence. The first image, the local hospital's small pediatric ward, nurses clapping as a delivery truck unloaded brand new ventilators. A caption scrolled across the bottom, funded by an anonymous donor. Gasps rippled down the table. The second clip, a classroom full of children, books stacked high on every desk, their teacher wiping tears from her eyes. The caption, school supply program funded anonymously. Whispers grew louder. Someone covered their mouth. Someone else muttered, "No, it can't be." The third clip, a group of single mothers receiving scholarship checks, each envelope bearing the same anonymous signature. Their gratitude was raw, their relief uncontainable. By now, the room was silent except for the sound of my video playing. Forks lay forgotten on plates. Eyes darted between me and the screen, disbelief battling with recognition. I let the final frame linger, a banner strung across the community center, reading simply, "Thank you to our anonymous benefactor." Then I set the phone down. I wasn't keeping anything for myself, I said, my voice low but unshakable. While you were calling me a parasite, I was feeding children. While you were saying I was selfish, I was buying ventilators for the hospital. While you demanded a share, I was giving it all to the people who needed it most. Silence. The only sound was the tick of the old grandfather clock in the hall. I looked at each of them, one by one. The cousins who laughed behind my back, the uncles who sneered, the aunts who shook their heads at my choices. You thought you could shame me into giving you something you hadn't earned. But the truth is, you didn't even bother to ask what I'd done. You never once believed I could be more than the child you pitied. My hands trembled, not with fear but with release. Well, believe it now. For once, no one interrupted. No one sneered. No one laughed. They sat there, faces pale, some ashamed, some resentful, but all quiet. It was the first quiet I had ever owned in that house. And in that quiet, I felt something shift, not just in them, but in me. It began, as these things often do, with a whisper. One cousin, too stunned to stay quiet, shared the video with a friend. That friend passed it along to her husband. By midnight, the clip that had silenced my family was being played on phones, in diners, in living rooms, even in the parking lot outside the church. By morning, the whisper had grown teeth. I woke to a phone buzzing on the nightstand, dozens of messages crowding the screen. "Clara, is this true? You really donated all that? God bless you for what you did for the hospital." When I stepped outside, the street itself seemed to watch me. Neighbors watering their lawns paused, lifting their heads. Mrs. Langley from next door, who only days ago had avoided my gaze, waved awkwardly and said, "We're proud of you, Clara." Proud. The word rang strange in my ears. I hadn't heard it in years, not since my mother, long before Evelyn ever set foot in this house. At the corner store, the cashier refused my money. "Your coffee's on the house," he said, pushing back my hand when I tried to pay. "After what you did for those kids at the school, it's the least I can do." I thanked him, though my throat was tight. For so long, I'd walked these streets with my head bowed, carrying the invisible brand of parasite. Now those same streets echoed with gratitude I hadn't asked for. But admiration is a double-edged thing. By noon, a local reporter stood at my door, microphone in hand, her cameraman already filming. "Clara Monroe," she said, her tone urgent. "Can you tell us why you chose to give so much in secret?" I stared at her. Behind her, neighbors leaned on fences, pretending not to listen but hanging on every word. Why in secret? The answer was simple, because I hadn't needed applause. I had only needed purpose. Still, I said nothing. I closed the door gently, leaving their questions to rattle against the wood. That evening, though, I couldn't escape it. The video played on the local news, then spread online. Headlines popped up on Facebook feeds. "Charleston woman secretly funds hospitals, schools, families." A quote from the community center director made its way across the screen. "We thought she was just another donor passing through. Turns out she's one of our own." My phone buzzed endlessly. Texts from people I hadn't spoken to in years, former classmates, old co-workers. Each message carried awe, apologies, sometimes envy, but one message stopped me cold. It came from Evelyn. "Enjoy your moment, Clara, but don't mistake pity for respect." I sat on the porch in the dark, the glow of my phone screen fading, listening to the town hum with new stories about me. Laughter drifted from the houses nearby, voices calling my name as though it had always been theirs to praise. And yet, beneath the swell of admiration, I felt unease. Because when people turn quickly, from scorn to reverence, they can turn just as quickly back again. Still, I thought of the children with new books, the mothers with scholarships, the patients breathing easier with fresh machines. Their gratitude was real, whether whispered or shouted, whether the world noticed or not. I lifted my coffee cup in the night air, toasting the silence, and whispered, "For you, Mom." The flame of respect in this town had been lit, but flames spread fast, and I knew the fire was only beginning. By the end of the week, I could not walk 3 blocks without hearing my name. "Clara, you're the woman from the news," strangers said, pressing my hand, thanking me as though I had stitched their wounds myself. At the grocery store, someone slipped flowers into my cart. At the library, a young mother stopped me in the aisle, tears shining in her eyes. "Because of you, my daughter has her first real set of books," she whispered. The town had turned on its axis. Only days before, I was the parasite, the selfish stepdaughter, the one who lingered at the edges of parties with nothing to offer. Now, Charleston called me a savior. I hadn't asked for it. I hadn't wanted it. But once the tide comes in, there is no holding it back. Reporters knocked at my door daily. Local news had given way to regional outlets, then national. A magazine wanted to do a profile, the woman who saved a town. Invitations flooded my inbox, speeches at community banquets, interviews for podcasts. I ignored most of them, but still, the noise grew. I found myself on the front page of the Charleston Gazette, my photo grainy and unflattering, captioned with the words, "Respect is thicker than blood." They had lifted the line from my video, from the night I showed my family what I'd truly done. I read the headline over and over, wondering if it belonged to me at all. But fame, even the quiet kind, stirs resentment. One evening, as I returned from the hospital, where I'd visited the new wing my funds had built, I found my porch crowded with family. Mark, Ruth, Daniel, and others. They stood there as if they owned the night, their faces hard under the porch light. "You think you're some kind of hero now," Mark spat. "You humiliated us," Ruth added, her voice trembling with anger. "On television, no less, the whole world thinks we're leeches." Daniel stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Don't pretend this was for the town. You wanted attention, you wanted the spotlight, and now you've got it." I unlocked the door without answering, but Daniel shoved his foot against the frame. "You're not better than us, Clara. Don't forget where you came from. Without this family, you'd be nothing." His words hit the old bruise inside me, the one that still ached from years of being told I owed them my existence. But I was not the same girl anymore. I pushed the door open harder. His foot slipped. For the first time, it was me forcing him back, not the other way around. "Family," I said evenly, "is respect. And until you learn that, you're not mine." The door shut on their protests, muffling them into silence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, the deed on the mantel, my mother's photograph glowing in the candlelight. Outside, the world praised me, but inside, the war raged louder. Because respect from strangers cannot fill the hollow left by betrayal from blood. And still, I knew this much. They could no longer touch me with their names, their sneers, their demands. They had tried to paint me as a parasite. The town had seen otherwise. For the first time in my life, I had the louder voice. But louder voices attract enemies. And I could feel it already, beneath the praise, beneath the gratitude. Resentment was gathering like thunder on the horizon. The storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. Admiration never comes alone. It always carries a shadow. For a week, Charleston wrapped me in warmth I had never known. Neighbors waved, strangers thanked me, children held my hand as if I had given them the world. But with each passing day, I began to notice another current, colder, running beneath the surface. It started small, an overheard whisper at the cafe, two women leaning close over their coffee. She didn't really give that money, it was her father's. No, I heard it was hush money, some kind of inheritance. I ignored it at first. Gossip was the town's native language, but soon the whispers grew teeth. One morning, the Charleston Gazette ran a short column buried on page 4. Questions arise over benefactors' motives. It quoted sources close to the family, who claimed I had staged the donations for publicity, that I was leveraging the town's gratitude to polish my own image. The words stung not because they were true, but because I recognized the venom. Only family could have whispered them. That evening, a neighbor knocked gently at my door. "Clara," she said, her face lined with concern, "you should know what they are saying, that you're not really helping, that you're just hungry for fame." Her voice cracked with embarrassment even as she repeated it. She didn't believe it, not really, but she felt I deserved to know. I thanked her, closed the door, and leaned against it, my chest tightening. It was them, Mark, Ruth, Daniel. I could almost hear their voices feeding lies to the press, each word dipped in bitterness. They had lost the battle of the house. They had lost the town's respect. But now they sought to win in the oldest way families know, by twisting the truth until it snapped. The lies multiplied. At the grocery store, a man I barely knew confronted me in the aisle. "So all that money came from your stepmother's savings, huh? You just paraded it around like it was yours." At church, whispers followed me down the pews. "Publicity stunt. She just wants attention." On social media, anonymous posts surfaced. "Ask her where the money really came from. No way she earned it herself." Each word was a thread pulling at the fabric I had woven so carefully. I wanted to shout, to defend myself, to wave the bank records and contracts in their faces. But my mother's voice echoed in memory. "Dignity isn't in how loud you speak, Clara. It's in how long you can stand while others tear at you." So I stood, silent, steady, watching as the storm gathered. But storms do not pass by themselves. One night, after another article appeared questioning my motives, I sat in my study, the house quiet around me, and opened the drawer where I had kept every receipt, every transfer, every letter from the charities I had funded. The proof was there, neat and undeniable, waiting for its moment. My hand rested on the stack, trembling not with fear but with the weight of choice. I could release it tomorrow, silence the lies, expose the truth once again, but part of me hesitated. Because once you defend yourself too loudly, the world begins to wonder if the lies were true after all. I left the papers in the drawer that night, lighting a candle instead. My mother's photograph glowed in the flame. I whispered to her as if she could still hear me. "They're trying again, but this time I won't let them bury me." Outside, thunder rolled low over Charleston, promising rain. The poisoned whispers had found their way into the air, but I had weathered worse storms, and in the morning I would decide how to fight this one. The rain came hard that morning, washing the streets of Charleston clean, as if the town itself wanted to rinse away the lies. I stood by the window, watching the water race down the glass, my reflection fractured by rivulets. Behind me, the drawer remained half open, the stack of papers whispering my name. By noon, the decision was made. I called the Gazette first, the same paper that had printed the column doubting me. "Meet me at the house," I said. "Bring your photographer, bring your questions, I'll bring the answers." They arrived within the hour, umbrellas dripping, notebooks ready, and behind them, as if drawn by magnet, came others. The neighbor from across the street, the pastor, even a few curious strangers who lingered on the porch. The house that had once been my cage now stood as a courtroom again, but this time I was prepared. I spread the papers across the dining table, receipts of wire transfers, bank statements, official letters stamped with the seals of hospitals, schools, charities. Each page was a brick, each signature a stone. Together, they built a fortress no whisper could topple. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is where the money went. Every dollar accounted for, every promise kept." A reporter leaned in, squinting at the figures. "These are extensive. You didn't just donate once, you've been giving for years." "Yes," I said simply. Cameras clicked, pens scratched, the murmurs in the room shifted, all replacing suspicion. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out one more paper, one I had saved for last, a handwritten letter from a mother whose son had survived on a ventilator I had purchased. Her words were shaky but fierce. "You didn't just save my boy, you gave me back my life." I read it aloud, my voice breaking only once. And when I finished, the silence was thick, no longer hostile but reverent. I looked up, meeting every eye in the room. My cousins stood near the back, pale and restless, their lies dissolving in the light of truth. "You called me selfish," I said softly. "You called me a parasite, but selfish people don't rebuild schools. Parasites don't keep hospitals alive. I didn't keep the money because money was never the point." I placed the letter gently on the pile of proof and let my final words hang in the air. "I am not rich because I kept money. I am strong because I knew where to give it." The quote seemed to crack something open. A reporter scribbled it down, repeating it under her breath. The photographer lowered his camera as if even the click of a shutter would break the moment. Behind me, the grandfather clock ticked, each sound louder than the storm outside. For years, they had tried to bury me under shame. But shame only works if you stay silent, and I was silent no longer. The evidence lay there, undeniable, unmovable, and for the first time I saw in their eyes not pity, not contempt, but respect. Real, unshakable respect. The storm had passed, but the air still carried its weight. In the days after I laid the evidence bare, Charleston seemed to exhale. The whispers quieted. Neighbors who had once avoided me now stopped to shake my hand. The Gazette printed a retraction on the front page, the headline bold and unambiguous, the truth about Clara Monroe. For a moment, it felt as if the world had righted itself, but shadows linger where pride has been wounded. It was a Wednesday evening when the knock came, hesitant at first, then firmer, as though demanding entry. When I opened the door, my cousin stood there. Mark, his face drawn tight, Ruth clutching her purse like a lifeline, Daniel avoiding my eyes. "Clara," Ruth began, her voice honeyed, "we just want to talk." I let them in, though every instinct told me not to. The house felt different with them inside, as if the walls remembered their sneers. They sat at the dining table, the same place where I had laid down my proof, the same table where they once called me selfish. Now their tones were softer, rehearsed. Mark spoke first. "You've done incredible things," he said, his jaw stiff. "We didn't see it before. We were wrong." Daniel nodded quickly, eager to echo the script. "You've always been, well, smarter than we gave you credit for. You proved us all wrong, Clara." Ruth leaned forward, her smile thin but polished. "And that's why we think we should put the past behind us. We're family, after all. We should be united." There it was, the pivot, from accusation to flattery, from condemnation to unity. But I heard the emptiness in every word. I folded my hands on the table. "United," I repeated slowly, "now that the town knows the truth." Ruth's smile faltered. Mark cleared his throat. "It's not like that." "It is exactly like that," I said quietly. Silence fell, heavy as a curtain. For the first time, none of them dared call me ungrateful or selfish. They had lost that weapon. Instead, they tried another. Daniel leaned in, his voice low. "Look, Clara, you've got resources now, influence. All we're saying is it wouldn't hurt to share. Maybe help us out a little. That's what family does." I stared at him, at the cousin who once laughed when Evelyn called me a parasite, at the man who told me I owed them my very existence. And now here he was, cloaking demand as kinship. I pushed back my chair and stood. The floorboards creaked under my weight, a sound that reminded me I was no longer the girl in the corner. I was the owner of this house, of this silence, of this moment. I looked at each of them in turn and said, clear and steady, family is respect, not blood. The words seemed to freeze the air. Mark shifted uncomfortably, Ruth's eyes darted to the floor, and Daniel opened his mouth but found nothing to say. You had your chance, I continued. Years of it, you could have treated me with kindness, with dignity. You chose cruelty instead. And now, when the world sees me differently, you want to rewrite history. But I remember, and I won't let you. Ruth rose to her feet, her face pale. You can't just cut us out. I'm not cutting you out, I replied. You did that yourselves. The clock in the hallway ticked loudly, each second underlining the boundary I had drawn. Finally, Mark muttered something about ungratefulness, the last scrap of pride he could cling to, and they left. Their footsteps echoed down the porch steps, fading into the night. I closed the door and leaned against it, my breath steady. The house was quiet again, but this time the quiet was mine. It wasn't the silence of being ignored or the silence of shame. It was the silence of a line drawn, a door shut, a truth spoken. The kind of silence that heals. The morning sun spilled over Charleston like a promise, golden and warm, reflecting off the white picket fences and the freshly polished sidewalks. Birds chirped in an almost celebratory rhythm, as if the town itself knew something monumental had changed. I stood in the doorway of my home, the very house where, months ago, Evelyn had sneered at me in front of everyone, calling me a parasite, mocking my presence at our own family gathering. That memory still stung, sharp and bitter, but it no longer weighed me down. Now I looked at that same house and felt a quiet pride. Every beam, every floorboard, every wall held a story of resilience, of persistence, of silent victories. Today was the day I had promised myself I would make a difference beyond my own family's petty squabbles. I had arranged for a town-wide event at the community center, a charity fund for families in need, a scholarship for local students, and resources for the elderly struggling to make ends meet. Every penny, every plan, had been kept secret for months, carefully curated so that no one could accuse me of doing it for recognition. The surprise element was crucial. As I walked into the community center, I noticed the familiar faces of neighbors who had once whispered behind my back. Their eyes widened, some in disbelief, others in admiration. Children ran past me, tugging at their parents, whispering, "Is this her?" Yes, this was me. Clara Monroe, 32 years old, standing tall, owning not only a home but a legacy of kindness and courage. The first speech of the morning was given by Mayor Thompson, a stoic man not easily impressed. Yet even he paused, adjusting his glasses as he addressed the crowd. "Today," he said, voice resonant, "we celebrate not just generosity but integrity. One of our own, who faced ridicule and doubt from her family, has quietly changed lives across Charleston. Clara Monroe, will you come forward?" I stepped up, my heels clicking softly on the wooden stage. The applause was polite at first, but as parents recognized the names of their children and neighbors, saw their own lives impacted by the fund, it swelled into a standing ovation. I smiled, feeling the warmth in my chest that no family argument, no sneer, no humiliation could ever take away. "Thank you," I began, my voice calm yet carrying through the hall. "When I was younger, I was called many things I did not deserve. I was told I was useless, a burden, even a parasite. I believed them sometimes. And yet today, here I am, not because I sought revenge, but because I believed in something greater than myself, our community. We are stronger when we lift each other, when we act not for recognition, but for love, compassion, and respect. I glanced down at the list of families who had received support, the scholarships awarded, the programs funded. Each name represented a story, a life touched quietly, meaningfully. This, I continued, is the real wealth, not money, not property, not status, but the ability to make a difference in someone else's life. That is the legacy we leave. After the ceremony, people lingered, coming up to shake my hand, to hug me, to share their gratitude. Children offered handmade cards, elders smiled with eyes that glimmered with unshed tears. Somewhere in the crowd, I caught sight of my cousins, distant but present, watching quietly from the back. They had finally seen the measure of true worth. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The satisfaction of integrity, of having stayed true to myself, was more than enough. Later, as I stood on the porch looking over the quiet streets of Charleston, I felt the gentle hum of a town alive, aware, and grateful. The morning had passed, and in its wake, a sense of peace settled over me. To everyone watching, whether in Charleston, across the country, or somewhere else entirely, thank you for being part of this journey. Life will challenge you, will question your worth, and sometimes will seem unbearably cruel. But remember this: strength is quiet, courage is patient, and true power comes not from hurting others, but from lifting them. May your homes be filled with love, your hearts with understanding, and your families with happiness. May you find the courage to stand tall, the wisdom to act kindly, and the joy in knowing that one person's efforts can ripple far beyond what we imagine. From my heart to yours, stay strong, be generous, and treasure the people who truly matter.